kids. Fuck the kids? Yeah.
When I say, who's the master? You say,
What is up, guys? Show Enough the King here, back with another video, and today I wanted to start a little drama. So if you guys have not been paying attention, over the last week I uploaded a video. I talk a lot about G.I. Joes and a lot about the new retro line and the new O-ring line that's coming out with Hasbro. There's been a lot of drama, a lot of controversy, and I figured, hey, it's the end of the year, let's start some more drama. So what I wanted to do today, as you guys could probably tell in the title, is I want to talk about nostalgia versus objectivity. And what I mean by that is the ability of people to accept the nostalgia, but look at things in an objective manner. And the reason why I say this is because I think there is, again, a lot of controversy right now with seeing if, with the 40-year anniversary of G.I. Joe going on, and figuring out that Hasbro has decided to bring back O-ring, not being sold in store, but only being sold online. And is that going to end up replacing the retro line, which was the successor to the 25th anniversary figures, where we had the 3 1/4 inch to 4 inch figures. And again, so now we have a lot of people on the left saying, hey, I love retro. We have people on the right that's saying, hey, I love O-ring and I'm glad the other one's gone. And me personally, again, I'll give you my resume. Again, I was born in the 80s. Again, I grew up watching G.I. Joe, Silverhawks, Transformers, and then early next into, I started with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Double Dragon in the 90s, and such and such and such. So primarily, though, again, even though I watched G.I. Joe, my cousin was the collector of G.I. Joes. Like, I love the G.I. Joe vehicles, but he was the collector of the action figures. So I mostly kept my focus on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, X-Men, Transformers, again, Thundercats, toys of that nature. And I kind of just, whenever I wanted to play with G.I. Joes, I would go to his house. So that being said, I didn't have a huge amount of, G.I. Joes back in the day. And because they didn't really fit the scale of the toys that I were playing with at the time, that's again why I didn't really collect them that heavily. But now things have changed. I'm older. I have access to money. I have the ability to now kind of go in and, buy back some of the old figures. And again, as I remember, I didn't necessarily look too fondly on O-ring. Again, I think there was nostalgic points that was hit. And I think that there are nostalgic things with everything. But I am just looking at these things objectively, and I'm saying I didn't remember O-ring blowing me away from a perspective of, wow, this is like the all-time greatest figure ever. Like, it could never be better than this. Like, I never really had that outlook on things. Like, now as an adult, when I look at these things, I can appreciate the nostalgic value of these figures, but I'm also looking at it from a 2021 point, and I can also say things like, yeah, nostalgic. Oh yeah, when you look at this Roblox, I see the nostalgia comes rushing back to me playing with my cousin. We're running around and just, having a great time with G.I. Joes. And then when I look at it and I try to compare it to like the new retro G.I. Joes, I'm like, to me, this is objectionably a better figure than that O-ring, like hands down. Like, it isn't even a question in my mind. But I do seem to see that there are a lot of people out there who would argue, no, retro is better, da 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 da. And to me, I just kind of wonder, do you really think that? Do you really think that objectively that this is a worse figure than this? Like, I just don't see it. So one of the other things that I said that was very controversial in my video from last week is when I compared an O-ring figure to this, base level army figure. And again, at the time I was being a bit facetious, but I didn't really have anything to compare it to because, again, I did not up until this point own a O-ring figure, but that has actually officially changed. So as of yesterday, I went out to one of my local toy shops, and again, they had a lot of retro stuff. I ended up, picking up a Cobra Night Raven, not the entire, it was incomplete, but I was able to get a Cobra Night Raven. I ended up getting a Snowcat, and a couple of other GI Joe, things. And then I ended up saying, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna go ahead and grab an O-ring figure just so that I can kind of verify my thought on what O-ring is. So I went out and I saw this roadblock, and this is a 91 vintage roadblock that was made from the ones from the 80s. So this isn't the 83 roadblock. This is, I believe, this is the 1991 roadblock, but it was made in the same vein as the 80s version. And again, it actually has the the arm swivel here, which was new from the first wave. So I kind of went out and I bought it, and I was just kind of like, I want to take this home and I'm going to compare this O-ring figure to all of my other 3¼ inch, 4-inch figures, and just kind of objectively look at these and say, is this better than the retro G.I. Joes? And also I wanted to compare them to all the other ones, and I kind of had it based off of, in my opinion, from like quality wise and price wise. And again, I just wanted to kind of sit down with you guys and kind of talk about, where I stood. And, I actually now, and I'm going to say something controversial, when I was being facetious by saying that this cheap thing that I got, and with I think this was like a click and play average soldier, I was jokingly saying that this one is equivalent to a O-ring. But now that I actually look at them side by side, I take back my statement, and I actually will stick and say that these are pretty much the same figures by and large. I mean, there are slight differences, but overall, I think these are the same figures. And again, you really can't even question it once you. Well, and again, we'll get to that point soon. So. All right, so like I said, again, I'm going to go through and make my case about these two, and this, not being much different than this, and why that is better than that. So I'll get into that, and I'll make my case, and then we'll kind of go from there. But what I wanted to do is I just want to better articulate what I mean by nostalgia versus objectivity. So to me, the best example that I can give is, I'll give you two. So right here we have a Tiger Electronics X-Men handheld game. Like, these were huge back in the 80s and into the 90s, and I had dozens of these Tiger Electronic games, right? So you basically just kind of hit the button. I don't know if it's going to get captured well on screen. So here we go with Cyclops, and you can just move. So again, didn't want to go through the whole thing, but I just wanted to show you that. So when I saw this, Hasbro, I realized that Hasbro was re-releasing these things, and they were going to be modeled after the 80s and 90s version of this, even right down to the Tiger Electronics insignia and just everything. So immediately I jumped online and I pre-ordered these. I got the whole set. I got the X-Men, I got the Transformers, I got the Aladdin, and I believe I got the Lion King too. And then there's even the Wave 2, and I ended up getting those too. And when these first were announced, I was so hyped, because to that point, I hadn't played with one of these in at least 10, 20 years. Easy. And I was like, this is just like, my nostalgia was like racing. I was getting a dopamine release. And then when it finally came in the mail, I like ripped open the packaging, I threw the batteries in, and I started playing it. And then after about 2 to 3 minutes, I was like, this wasn't as good as I remembered it. And again, when I look at it, I'm like, my nostalgia corrected itself, and I was objectively looking at this, and I was saying, yeah, back when I was like 10, or back when I was like, 12, or whatever age I was back when I was originally playing this was awesome. Some of these were coming out, and again, like when I was young, I couldn't afford a Game Boy, so these were the kind of things that my parents would get us. If you couldn't afford a Game Boy, I damn sure couldn't afford a Game Gear. So back then, and this is all you had, these were a godsend. But now, me looking at it with an adult brain and just trying to play it and try to relive my childhood, I can objectively look at this and say, not only was this not great as far as like being produced, it wasn't as fun as I, remembered it looking at it from a child's mindset. So I still appreciate this 100%. And as Hasbro keeps releasing them, I will 100% buy them. But I will no longer be looking at this from a nostalgic point. Well, I guess I will, otherwise I wouldn't buy it. But I have scaled my nostalgia on these to a realistic expectation to be like, look, just because it hit a point in your heart from back in the day doesn't mean that it is fantastic by today's standards. Because again, now, as you guys know, we have handhelds from like the Nintendo Switch. They can produce things that this thing couldn't do in its wildest day. And again, I know it's not necessarily fair to compare this to like a Nintendo Switch, but you get my point. So that's that. Then my other example is, again, in the 90s, I was a giant Power Ranger fan, okay? Like one of the biggest Power Ranger fans that there was, okay? And again, anything that came out with the original MMPR, I had to have it. So again, here we have the Blade Blaster. This is the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Blade Blaster from the 90s. This is the original one created for child's hands. And again, as you guys can see, this thing looks cool. It still has a whole converting thing where you can like kind of like slap it and kind of put it in like blaster mode, and then it can kind of go back and convert, and you can roll back into blade, and then it's going back into its blade mode, right? So you see this is great. Nostalgia, loved having this. But then something happened with Bandai, and they came out with Legacy Collection. And again, I don't know what you guys know. If you guys are only G.I. Joe fans, you really wouldn't know. But Legacy Collection is basically, they went back to all the old school toys from the 90s, and they redid them in an adult aesthetic. They made them bigger, they added die cast, they made it more accurate to the shows. And then, excuse me if the thing is shaking, they brought out this Legacy Blade Blaster. I'm gonna try to get it in screen on camera without knocking everything over. And again, if you hold this up to what you used to have, it is a night and day difference. Again, the Power Rangers is in the correct color. Instead of plastic, we got die cast. Again, it's made for adult hands. Again, the blade itself isn't like plastic. It actually matches what was sold in the store. They went in and they pimped it out. And now, even though the nostalgia Blade Blaster that I had from the original 80s, from the 90s, has now been upgraded to the Legacy version. So to me, I'm not stuck in a mindset where just because it's what I remember it pulls at my nostalgic heartstrings, that I can't objectively look at and say the Legacy Blade Blaster is leagues better in every way, shape, and factor. So I just wanted to give you those two examples, because now it's time to kind of look at these action figures and kind of just tell you my mindset on why I think that and let me be clear before I say this. I am not saying that I don't want Hasbro to not make O-Ring. I think it's the 40th anniversary. O-Ring is very important to G.I. Joe. It comes with a lot of vehicles, which is what I'm really interested in. I don't want Hasbro to not make O-Ring. I just want to make sure that I spread the word that I don't want them to get rid of retro. I think that O-Ring should come out for the 40th anniversary, and if it does well, hey, keep selling it on the website. To me, there's no world where we can't have it all. I mean, if you want to sell retro at Walmart exclusively, O-ring exclusively on Hasbro Pulse, and then we got classified being split between online and in store. I think there is a world for all three in the GI Joe world, and I think that all three can coexist personally. But what I am just saying is that I think that if we are looking at O-ring, I think that people who love O-ring and again, you can love O-ring and love retro. What I'm saying is that the people who think that O-ring is better than retro, I don't know how honest you're really being, because again, if you look at this thing objectively, this is not a better figure. It just isn't. So let's talk about it. Now, let's get one thing out of the way. When I say retro, don't nobody bring this fool up, okay? I understand that this Duke is doo-doo, okay? Like, his face, his little screaming face is horrible. Again, his arms are horrible. The fact that they can just pop off with a slight tug is horrible. And again, I would never defend this Duke being a part of the line. But you cannot use him as the entire wave, because again, we have things like Snake Eyes right here. And this is the Snake Eyes that I am going to be comparing when I do my Versus review. Once the new O-ring Snake Eyes Storm Shadow comes out, this is the one I'll be doing the Versus review on and comparing it to directly. But again, for right now, for all intents and purposes, let's go ahead and take a look at the retro versus the O-ring. And again, the one thing that really bugs me about the retro figures are these exposed like joints. Like, I know this is like kind of like par for the course for O-ring. This is kind of what gives them their nostalgic touch, are these like bolts that are in the arms and in the shoulders and then on the sides of things of that nature. To me, I am a amateur toy photographer, so there's nothing that takes me out of the immersion more than seeing these things in photos. So like, if you guys have checked out my Instagram, which is Mag Nerd Podcast on Instagram, make sure you check it out. You will see that I take photos of action figures and just kind of like put them in the natural. I don't do a lot of Photoshop. I don't do any Photoshop at all. I actually try to get like really like cool photos out in the wild or in my office or in my basement in its natural habitat. And then for me to do that, you need a figure that doesn't have a lot of exposed like joints and points like this Snake Eyes. Like, if you look at his shoulders, you don't see anything. You don't, even in the arms, you know, these things are on a ratchet. In the knees, again, his knees are double jointed, as I said before. Whereas the knees in this one, again, that's the range of motion you get with O-ring versus the range of motion you get with retro, okay? And again, put him in like a similar position. You see? It's like night and day. And again, his foot, there's no pivot there. Whereas on this Snake Eyes, there's some movement, there's some pivot to it. It can move. Like, the articulation on this retro line is far superior than anything that we ever got from O-ring. And again, to my knowledge, the new O-ring that we're getting from Hasbro isn't, the only thing that's changing is the actual the stability of the actual O-ring, and the fact that the hands themselves will be a little bit more malleable so they don't snap off like these other ones tended to do. But other than that, they're going to be going right back to the same vein of those O-ring figures. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about, again, if we're just talking about like articulation, hands down, retro wins. And then if we're talking about like sculpt, again, in my opinion, retro wins this hands down, because even though this Duke has the ugliest yelling face ever, the actual face sculpt itself is actually pretty freaking good. Now, again, I'm not saying that the O-ring one is bad. And again, this thing is like 20 some odd years old and it still looks good. There's not a lot of paint chipping. So I'm not going to give any like negatives to the O-ring in this aspect. I just feel like that the retro line is kind of like wrapped up some of those things that they learned from the old school one and made it better. Again, Duke, not the best example. Other thing, removable helmets. Again, you have this with the Duke. You have this with the Cobra Officer, which is an amazing figure. Like, look at this Cobra Officer. Again, you got the molded, Cobra insignia. You have the actual tactical vest. It's not actually a molded piece. It is an actual tactical vest that could be removed if you wanted to. Again, he has a removable helmet. And then you can kind of look at his face and you can kind of see that the molding that they did on in this figure itself was very, very good. Again, he has the same double jointed knees that the Snake Eyes has. He has removable pistol. Again, he has an actual holster that's not molded in. Again, this figure is amazing. And again, I know there are some people who complain about the long legs, but I like the legs. And to me, when you're doing a photo shoot and you have these things in like a vehicle, or if you have them in a HISS tank and you have them like walking in front of a HISS tank, the natural positions that they can make with holding weapons is a lot better than what you can do with O-ring, in my opinion. Now, what I was saying about comparing all these figures, and again, just coming out of the blue, the cheapest you can get is this. Like, this is like level 1, 3¼ inch, 4-inch figure. These are like the dollar store action figures. You can kind of see the shiny plastic face, the cheap molding. Again, there is no articulation in these things whatsoever. His arm can go up, down, and around, and that's about it. No left to right, no T-spreads, no ankle pivot, no knee bend, nothing. Like, these are like the dollar fodder figures. And again, you just kind of have like those static hand grips where they can, trigger fingers. But again, I do feel like G.I. Joe, look at it. They share the same kind of hand positions. That like non-malleable, like plastic, like, now again, I will say that the O-ring can move a little bit more than this one, but not much. So they do share some similarities with this like dollar store cheap figure. But again, this one is what it is. And then what I would say is I would come up next is to the one that I personally think is equivalent to the O-ring figure, are these like, not Action Force, because that's Action Force back there. I think these are click and play. These click and play soldiers. Now again, what I'll say about these click and play soldiers is they have like this like almost like washboard generic like stomachs that go really flat in the front and back, and then they have that annoying screw in the back that you used to see from like toy stores and like the old school soldiers. But again, they do share that same thing with the O-ring figures, where you have that like deep hole with the screw in it, and then again you have these like ugly like screw holes in the shoulders that go in the front and back that I do not like, that this figure doesn't do. Now again, this same articulation, they can both do a T-spread. They can both do a T-spread, as you can see here. They both have that like, and this one actually has a more malleable thing for the hand grip, so he can hold guns better. But again, they still have those same kind of hands. You see what I'm saying? And again, same thing here. Single jointed knee with the spreads. Molded hats, same thing. And again, of course, obviously one is white and one is black, but a similar style with the molding, with the face sculpts. Now, we'll say that this figure, he has a left to right, but he doesn't have an up or down. He has a left to right, but he also has an up and down. So he can actually, his ball hit on the ball joint can do like an up and down. And then, of course, with this Roblox, his foot doesn't have any playability at all, versus this click and play soldier actually does. So again, I know I was joking when I said that they were similar, but they actually are in a lot of ways. And again, I would actually almost give click and play a little bit of bonus points, because these ugly pins that you see in these figures are hidden very well in this click and play soldier. You don't have any in the shoulder, and then even the ones you get at the arms are kind of hidden to the point where it's molded into the actual shirt that he has on, is what I'm saying. So the next up would be the soldiers from at Action Force. And again, same thing with Action Force. They improved removable helmets, molded very well. They don't have as much of the annoying pins in the arms and legs, and again, they're hitting very well. Now, what I will say that the O-Ring Joe does way better is that this one has more posability in the legs. He cannot split his legs at all, and he basically gets, like, again, single jointed knees, but you can get in some of those same gun holding positions, as you can see here. And again, I'm not going to go into super detail, but again, you have the Master Chief, you have the Cobra Officer, like I've mentioned, but then you have Joy Toy. And again, there are a lot of guys out there who don't even want to talk about Joy Toy, but these Joy Toy figures are absolutely incredible. Like, to me, this is the pinnacle of what 4-inch figures should be. Again, these are gun positions that you can get into that you cannot get into with O-Ring. You can get into them slightly with the retros, but you can't really do it with the O-Ring. And again, when you see things like, you know, everything you see on this figure can be removed. Helmet comes off. Detailed face sculpting. That scarf can come off. These armor pieces on here, all that can come off. The vest can come off. The knife that's here, it comes out of the actual sheath. Like, to me, this is what you want. Like, to me, when I look at this and then I look at this and I say to myself, yes. And again, let me be clear. This is like a $30, $20, $25, $30 figure. So it's not exactly fair for me to compare this to an O-Ring. But what I'm saying is that, like, when I look at this kind of nostalgia, when I get past that nostalgia part, this to me is objectively a better figure from top to bottom. Cannot be compared to anything else that G.I. Joe can produce as far as, like, what you can do with it. So, like, when I start posing him up against a Master Chief, or if I want to have him in, like, and he fits in everything. He fits in a Warthog. He fits in the Sky Striker. Once you take things off, like, this figure can fit in a lot of these Joe vehicles. But again, it is an amazing figure. An amazing figure. And then finally, my pride and joy, again, we have the Space Warrior from Joy Toy as well. This is a fighter that was built to fly. Again, he has, like, laser guns that you can kind of see here, and the sculpting and the detail in these guns are amazing. His hands are made to just wrap around the gun. Again, he has his hands can be changed out like you would see in a 6-inch figure. Again, his helmet, his head comes off, but he also has a civilian head that you can put on. These wings can obviously be removed for flight. The whole armor pieces can be removed for flight. Everything. So again, to me, when you are looking at these figures, these are the things that I'm thinking about when I'm spending my money. I'm like, when I take photos, is it going to look as natural as possible? When I'm playing with it, am I getting the most out of my posability, the detail to the sculpt? These are the things that I'm thinking about, and that's why I think that these Cobra Officers, these G.I. Joe retro figures, are just superior in every way to the O-Ring. All right? So, again, I didn't want to, dive too deep. Just wanted to bring this out. But, again, just to let you guys know, no hate for O-Ring. I definitely want O-Ring to be there. I just would love it for you guys to kind of take a step back and just look and say to yourself, me picking up these O-Rings, is that really because I think they're better than retro? Or is it just because I'm kind of stuck in the past and just I love the nostalgia that it comes with from O-Rings? That's what I'm saying. So just, again, let's have a conversation. Let's keep it respectful as much as possible. I don't mind getting down and dirty in the comment section either. So it is what it is. This is Sean of the King, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.